I'm Cinder Niemela, and along with Charlotte Gilmano, welcome to the Inspired Wisdom Podcast. I believe the most powerful gifts you can give yourself is time to reflect on your talents and experience, and then have the wisdom to act with confidence and grace. This podcast is for entrepreneurs, leaders, and individuals who want to thrive in work and life. Your journey to being connected and inspired by the world around you starts right now. Hi, today my guest is Marcia Reynolds. She's an expert organizations call on to breathe life into their connections, conversations, and cultures. She's energetic, funny, and 100% committed to transformational leadership. In fact, she embodies transformational leadership. But as a child, she was described as precocious, opinionated, and with some kind of social problem. When she was 19, she found herself thrown in jail, suffering from drug abuse. It was her cellmate that taught her she was a smart, strong woman who cared about people. Her cellmate told her one day, "When you get that in here, when you know who you are, you can do anything out there." Over the past 30 years, Marcia has spoken and coached leaders in 38 countries and reached over 100,000 people worldwide in her training programs. She's published 3 books, completed 2 master's degrees, one in broadcasting and one in adult learning, and she has a doctorate in organizational psychology. And she has 2 highly engaging and entertaining TEDx talks. I'll provide links to the talks in the notes. Marcia continues to research transformational leadership to help startups and established Fortune 500 companies prosper in today's chaotic, unpredictable world. Please join me in my interview with Dr. Marcia Reynolds. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I wanted to talk to you about your latest work. And as I understand it, and I haven't read the book yet because it's not out yet, but as I understand it, it's about reflection.
Yeah. You know, I had a really nice quote today. I coached someone this morning, and let me read it. She said, "When you reflect to me what you're hearing, it's like helping me see doors on a concrete wall." Isn't that fabulous?
Wow, that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's called reflective inquiry. You want me to talk about that?
Yes, please. And how did you get interested in it? When did it first start?
Okay. Well, you know, my last book, The Discomfort Zone, I wrote because I just was noticing that coaches would take their clients all the way up to this point and then wouldn't kick them over the edge. And, you know, and so I started exploring what is it that would stop them? What were they afraid of? And what I started to notice was that it wasn't so much the question, but they were more afraid of reflecting what was in the moment, especially if it would be a difficult reflection to hear. So and back in the days when we first created the competencies, using reflection, paraphrasing, summarizing, labeling, noticing the emotions. And that was just as much as part of what coaching is questions. But that's gotten lost. And everybody's in search of the powerful question. I said, I think there's more to what is reflection and what does it, what's the impact on the brain when people reflect to us, not just ask us questions. And then I found this fabulous book with a great quote with the guy who actually coined the term reflective inquiry. And we always think that coaching comes from like therapy models, cognitive behavioral therapy or consulting. And I read this and I'm like, well, of course. So my second master's degree was in adult learning and instructional design. in education.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been really interested in how we learn. You know, when I look at the brain, I'm looking at it as a learning machine,
Mm-hmm.
not just this thing of feelings and needs and desires. And this guy named John Dewey wrote a book in 1910 called How We Think. And John Dewey was an educational reformer. And what he wanted to do was to bring more of kind of the Socratic way into the classroom. So he was the first one to say we have to engage children even to think differently. And we do that by reflecting what we hear and then asking them questions. And he said, inquiry is more than asking questions. He says, when you really look at inquiry and combine reflection with it, that inquiry provokes insight, questions just get answers. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that fabulous?
That's really fabulous.
I know. And it's like, oh my God, he's the one. And then, all the stuff that I've been learning from the neuroscientists about it takes an outside disruption to break through our resistance and our frames and our automatic processing. They're all writing that recently. And I read his book and I'm like, oh, he wrote about this in 1910. When we hold up, and it's not even a mirror, I call it active replay. When we hold up almost like the movie in front of people where they can see how they think and how they're reacting. And it's almost like that's all it takes for them to view this, to see the gaps in their logic, the inherited beliefs that no longer serve them, and start to be able to explore their fears, what they really want. That there's so much power in just the reflective statements. And then the questions are just the curiosity based on what we notice.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I heard. Here's what I saw in terms of your shift of emotions, and and what I'd like to explore with you. And it's really fascinating that this guy 30 years later in the 40s read Dewey's book and said, wow, I predict that sometime in the future, there's going to be a new profession. And it's going to be people that really just help us think. And I think we'll call them knowledge Sherpas.
Knowledge Sherpas. Oh, that's a great term, isn't it?
I know. And I said, oh my God, he predicted coaching. He had a different name for it. We're knowledge Sherpas.
That is awesome.
I know. And so
what was his name?
Oh, it's like a funny name. It's like Vander Mortal or something.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I've got it in my book because I'm, laying this all out of what it is we're really doing and where did it come from. Mm-hmm. And the more I get into this, and when I do demos and, for ICF chapters, and the more I use reflective statements, then I even use questions. And I believe that if you use a powerful reflective statement, then what follows could be a closed question, but it won't evoke a yes or no answer. It's, it's like, is this true for you? Here's what I heard you say. Is that true for you today? Doesn't provoke a yes or no. It's when I'm clarifying what I notice, what I hear, what I see. That, certainly on balance, I'll use more open questions. But to say that a closed question is bad is like, no, I have found them to be extremely useful. And back in the day when we were taught to coach you about distinctions and, is it this or is it this? I mean, that's a closed question, essentially. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I say, we've lost in the rules and the markers, that we've lost this essence of what it is we're really doing. as coaches. And as coaches, all we're doing, we are knowledge Sherpas. We're thinking partners. We're just trying to make or help our clients to think more broadly for themselves. And how best do we do that? And to me, when it really is simply, I receive what you give me and I'm just giving it back to you, and I'm curious about it, that it actually simplifies coaching, instead of like, oh, I have to remember these powerful questions that I was taught, or to look for something that's going to create the breakthrough, when actually holding up that dynamic mirror is often what creates the breakthrough. It's like I can finally see, Richard Boyatzis said, we can't see beyond the box until we actually see the box. And I think that's what we're doing when we use reflection, is we're helping people see the box they hold in their brains.
Yes. Yeah. Very well stated. I really like that. And often when we ask our clients, well, what has been the value of this conversation or this coaching relationship? What's been the value for you? A lot of times I find people say that you're a sounding board. I can just talk about what's on my mind and where I feel stuck and where I feel challenged and where I want to have a breakthrough. And you just feed that back to me without an agenda.
Right. So it's a safe space to do that. I know. And that's of great value, because number one, we can't do it ourselves. And number two, we often don't feel safe to do it with anyone else, or just to even take the time to do it.
So in your book then, or your work, what is the main question that you're answering?
I think it's, how best do we help our clients think for themselves?
If our clients say, I want to be a better leader, or I want to be a more effective communicator, things like that. How would you work with someone using reflection?
Yeah. Cinder, how it's, whatever it is that they bring to the table is never quite what it is they end up working on. And so, like, to say, I want to be a better leader, we have to explore what two things: what is better and what is leader. First, I would want to know, which of those concepts, can we explore? I find oftentimes just exploring the concept of leader, what is leader to you? And what is it you think you're missing is an interesting thing, because that peels down to what they're afraid to do, like trust, what they feel where they feel they're inadequate, and the judgment they might fear. Better, to be a better leader. Again, so what is it? Better means you're doing something now okay, and you would like to improve it. So what is that? What is that? And what I find so fascinating is when you put the two together, they often think, better is that I can motivate people, that I can activate them, that I can get better results. But then you look at their concept of leader, and leader is inspiring people to give more on their own, to be their higher self, play a bigger game, which requires a lot of trust and believing in them and listening to them. So there's this kind of like a conflict of active passive, what they view as passive, and it comes into their daily being, that I have to get things done, but I want people to I want to inspire people to step up and work on their own, which means I have to step back. So it's one step forward, one step back. And so just by asking to find those things to me and reflecting back what I hear, that they can start to hear their conflict values, that they start to hear their limitations. You know, I had a client just last night who, you know, it's just like these reoccurring patterns. So she's tired, she's exhausted. Mm. And when we get into looking at her difficulties at work, it's like, well, you know, she is having a hard time. She's got new leaders working under her, so she doesn't trust them yet. You know, they're not going to get the results that she needs right now. So it's like she wants to let go because she's tired and exhausted, but she won't let go because she doesn't trust them. Mm-hmm. You know, and so it's like, where in the middle can you stand so you don't kill yourself?
Yeah.
And I mean that literally, because she's, you know, she's getting to a place where she's getting depressed about her lack of, you know, about her energy and her loss of joy in her life and all of that, and how she is with her children, and you know, and so it's not about answers as much as it is being able to look at it. So, you know, let me give you a metaphor. When my first job was in a psychiatric hospital, and my first master's degree was actually broadcasting. And so I was hired to push TVs around in this hospital. But I had studied how to use video as a feedback mechanism and how it helped when people watch themselves on video over time. You know, at first it always makes them feel awful. And then over time, they start seeing their gaps and where they want to improve. The woman who, the psychiatric nurse in charge of the women who were anorexic, came to me and to ask me if there's any programs I had that she could share, in educational programs. And so I told her about my research and the ability to help people really see themselves and start building on their, it actually builds on their self-esteem. And so she said, well, you know, she was willing to try anything with her patients, but she went to her attending doctor, and he said, as long as he could be there, we could videotape the patients just talking about their lives and who they are. The interesting thing about anorexia is that when the women would look in the mirror, they would see themselves as fat, even though they were wasting away. Mm. When we turned on the video and replayed it to them, they saw the truth of who they were. Mm. And that, I mean, it was painful, but it launched them on a journey of recovery once they could see the truth. Mm-hmm. I see the same thing in reflection. And that's why I say it's not really mirroring, because it's not static. It's an active replay where people see the truth of who they are and identify. And even if it's painful in the moment, which is the discomfort zone, that they recognize what gaps need to be filled in, what old beliefs need to be replaced, and what actions they truly need to take that they've been avoiding. So I'm a true believer in reflection, you know, and when we look at reflective inquiry, it's the reflection that's so powerful, and the inquiry then just tips people over the edge. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is there a correct way of reflecting back what somebody has said?
Yeah. Yeah, I often just start with, so here's what I heard you say, or let me see if I've got it right. Mm-hmm. And I'll summarize it. Oftentimes I'll relate it back to something they said earlier. You know, you just kind of like those keywords, you just pop in your brain so you can mm-hmm. pull them back out. So I hear you say, I noticed you shifted. I saw you look away when you said that. So it truly is just sharing cleanly what you saw, what you heard, what you noticed, what you witnessed in that moment. So, and to do, it's interesting. It's because I know it's hard sometimes to distinguish this whole thing called intuition from interpretation. I think the more cleanly you can just give them back their own words and their own expressions, the better it is. Sometimes I'll encapsulate it into just a couple of words, or a metaphor. Like this woman was talking about today, because of her health, she has to change her lifestyle, and she was talking about what has to happen with her business, and I said, it sounds like you're going through a divorce. Yeah, and which launched her on this whole other thing about what is divorce and what changes and what you have to let go of that she just couldn't seem to get to before. So sometimes it is the metaphor or just a few words that I encapsulate, but I've worked hard for it not to be my interpretation, but what I'm picking up, what I hear, and maybe there's a picture that I see that I share. And all of this is always an invitation, because many times, because they're thinking for themselves, they'll say, no, that's not quite it, which is great, because I'm just sharing what I picked up, and so they're not disagreeing with me, they're disagreeing with what was presented. So I don't take that personally. I think it's great.
Yeah. So that's the distinction between interpreting what they said and just reflecting back what they said.
Yeah, right. As an invitation, an invitation to look at it. Let's explore it. Is it right or wrong?
So let's assume that somebody comes to you in the initial conversation, and this is what they want from the coaching, and this is what they perceive are some of the obstacles to having that. And then you get into the coaching relationship, and the first session, they bring kind of the same things. They're saying the same things. You're reflecting back to them what you hear. The second and third, maybe fourth session, they continue to bring back the same thing.
Well, that's actually what happened last night. I said, she started into this whole thing about how tired and exhausted, and I said to her, I said, stop. I said, this is your pattern. How many conversations have we had on this already? And I'm very direct about that. But I mean, this is someone who's been with me for a couple of years now. So it's like, are we going to talk about this again? Are you ready to do something about this? Or this is just the pattern you're accepting to have?
Giving them the choice.
Yeah.
Yes.
And she said, yes, I know, it's my pattern. Yeah. Well, and this comes back to something we learned in our training years ago, that if you're clinging to the pattern, there's got to be something that's you're getting out of it. So I also know, from multiple sessions that, she likes that she's a very successful businesswoman. She owns like a very well-known franchise. She's the largest franchise owner in Asia. Because we've talked about, what if you were just to sell, if you're so tired, and she's not ready. She likes being, the successful entrepreneur. She likes the whole lifestyle and challenges. And, there's that dichotomy, but it's bringing her to tears.
So what do you do in this case? And I think it's a really common one. People want to change, but there's no real catalyst to change. Often that comes with either a severe illness or losing a job.
Yeah.
or losing a marriage or losing something,
A crisis.
has one say, okay, enough is enough. Now I do need to change. How do you hang in there as a coach with someone who brings the same patterns?
Yeah. You know, isn't it funny? Isn't it the same thing with companies that they won't change until there's a crisis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and it's awful and we just hang in there anyway. I think just bringing it back again. So it's like, okay, so it's the same conversation. You know, are you ready to move or not? But you know, Cinder, you know, the whole concept, you can ask the question, are you now ready to let go? But it's not about letting go as much as it is what's next. And it's an identity crisis. Who will I be when I'm not that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we all ran into that when we left corporate and put coach on our business card.
Yes.
It's like, what's that? That I'm no longer director of, vice president of, you know, I'm this thing that may or may not be held in high regard. And so it is often, it's not just stepping into the unknown, but that question of who will I be? And yet every day is stepping into the unknown and we just don't recognize it.
Yes, absolutely. I want to go back just a little bit with your question about why do coaches or why do people not stay with the reflective inquiry? Is there a discomfort? And then there's a long pause.
Mm-hmm. You know, the brain is a meaning-making machine. And so we have to make meaning of everything. And so we have our stories, and the stories live in this context that we create what's important to us and how we see the world, which then directs our behavior. And we go about our days not questioning that because we can't. We don't have, you know, we have to function.
Mm-hmm.
And really that's what ego is, that, you know, how I define myself. When we use reflection well, and it puts a crack in the frame of who I think I am and how I see the world, well, the brain can barely tolerate that. And actually what happens in that moment is the brain goes offline to rewire, to start to make sense of what I now see. So as it goes offline, there's this long pause. It's not that, you know, your client thinking, it's their brain restructuring. And they're like, kind of like, you know, they give you that, what I call the baby stare, where, you know, when babies see something for the very first time, before they cry or laugh, they just give you that kind of like dumb look, that, huh? Because they're trying to make sense of it. And that's what's actually happening in that moment of silence, is their brain is now trying to make sense of this new awareness. I mean, that's what new awareness is when we look at like the ICF competencies. It's not that I'd like, oh, look, I see another option I can take. I mean, this is like a whole new awareness of who I think I am and how I see the world. And once the brain rewires to create that, you can't go back. You can't go back. Yeah. And so it's all of a sudden I realize who I am, what I'm doing, how I'm hurting myself, what it is I'm avoiding, you know, all those things we call blind spots. I can now glimpse them because I have a broader sense, a broader perspective, you know, because you cracked my frame. So I always say that's the worst time to step in and fix them. You know, and that's what coaches do. They, you know, they start to backpedal because they get uncomfortable with that, or they're like, oh my God, the person's in pain, I have to fix them. And then we've quit holding our clients as creative, resourceful, and whole. We look at them as broken in that moment, and it's It's like, no, 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 no. That's when you have to just hold it. You, with courage and breathing, you hold the space. You know, and if it goes on painfully long, you know, then you say, so what's coming up for you? What's emerging? You know, what is it that you're thinking about now?
Yes, very powerful. I love that. I love your description of that. For the leader who really wants to develop their people,
Yeah.
what advice do you have for them?
You know, it is that dance of handing over and taking back. You know, and I see delegation as a development. You know, it's like the client I was telling you that she's like so afraid of handing over things because things won't get done right. That then she doesn't, but I'm sure she made mistakes along the way. So that the whole inability of leaders to really allow people to grow, to trip a little bit, to make a few mistakes, and then, you know, looking at the future, not like what you did bad, because people know what they did bad, you know, of saying, so this didn't achieve what you wanted. What would you do differently? You know, would you be willing to explore what might get a better result? So there's that willingness to give them space. And so Cindy, you know, I teach all over the world, and I have this exercise in listening where we look at the impact of emotions on listening. And I ask everywhere, so what are the dominant emotions in the workplace? And you know, it's the same thing everywhere, that it's overworked, anxious, fearful, tired, you know, and it's like nowhere in the world do people feel differently in the workplace. I mean, sometimes there might be some excitement, but it's more of that. And so when leaders say, I don't have time to coach, I'm like, oh, that's really, so you don't have time to create space for yourself to do other things, you know? And it's like, well, you know, when things get better, well, things aren't going to get better because they're always going to be crazy. Even when you're successful, it's crazy. You know, so when is that good time for you just to take a moment to step back to develop people? I think really pushing them to identify that and to see how they cannot move forward until they take the time to let people think for themselves, to encourage them to take some risks, even making it okay to make mistakes, that we have to create the space. The leaders have to create that. It's not going to be created for them. And their impatience to get things done, they have to really cap that. They'll get lost in the quick moving future because people won't be able to think with agility. They won't be able to think for themselves. They won't be able to innovate.
Yes, very interesting. I was going to ask you about that, knowing that you do teach all over the world. How much does culture influence the work that you do?
The brain works in humans fairly much the same. So, so those things that we react to and how we process information is all the same. What shifts is the willingness to be vulnerable and open. You know, the afraid of making mistakes is more profound in Asia than it is, let's say, Latin America. You know, and I didn't say the US because in the US, you know, we're so different culturally in the different regions. You know, the West from the East, the North from the South. It's hard to stereotype the US. But I often tell my clients in Asia that it's very similar, that the unwillingness to be direct, the reluctance to trust and delegate and allow people to make mistakes is very similar here in most parts. You know, I think for us here in the West, it's a little bit more open, but not in the rest of the country, you know? So It's interesting. And again, with culture, I'm very careful because cultures are changing in any of the big countries, just like the US. There's different cultures in different parts of the country. I teach a lot both in Shanghai and Beijing. The culture in Shanghai is totally different than Beijing. And so, Beijing is much more traditional and closed. Shanghai has a lot more multinational companies, and so they're a little bit more open. Like in China, I find when I work with Chinese companies that there's much more openness to accepting the changes that need to be made. So they don't like them, but they know that it has to happen. Like listening more. I do a lot of leaders coach training in China with Chinese companies, not just the companies with expats. I find that took years here in the US for US companies to truly get that coaching isn't something they can learn in a half a day. That it's a mindset shift, it's a way of being with people, and it's going to take, more than an event, that it's a process. In the last few years in the US, there's more of an acceptance of that, but there wasn't before that.
Interesting. Yeah.
Quick, fix my brain, give me a few skills, and I'm out of here. Mentality. Whereas in China, it was more about hierarchy. But they know with the younger generation, bless the younger generation, that they're expecting their leaders to really listen to them and develop them and believe in them and have two-way conversations, wherever country that they're in. So there's a shift going on, a powerful shift, which is, I'm happy to see.
Well, and you're very much a part of that, of enabling that shift. Maybe enable is the wrong word, but in helping that shift to happen, I think it's so important. So I am curious, this is just totally off topic. I am curious when you're working with Chinese companies or companies in other countries, are they speaking English or do you have interpreters?
Interpreters. Both in Russia and China, where I go, both of them twice a year. Occasionally, like I just taught this class in China to this company that their parent company is American. I had an interpreter, but the CEO, who's a woman, spoke to her leadership team in English. Even though I taught the class with an interpreter, they obviously all spoke English, but in terms of learning, she felt it was important that to truly get the concept, some of them may not be able to conceptualize well in English. So we still used an interpreter, although when I did my coaching demo, we didn't because they were just watching. So that was an interesting mix. Other Chinese companies, if their parent company is Chinese, then you definitely need an interpreter. Like there's one company I teach for in China whose parent company is French, but English is the language, the international language. So most of them speak some level of English. Russia now was a little harder because, in Russia, up till 20 years ago, it was like banned if you had an English book. It was, the devil. And so now the younger generations now have English, but the older ones don't. And so it's a real interesting, they all want to talk to me in English, and I can't do that in the class. But I would say that the transformation of leadership and speaking English and all that was slower in Russia than China.
Okay. And have you been to Africa or India?
Yes, both, and both speak English. India because of the British influence for years, and Africa because most of them, it was at least where I've gone was, again, the British influence, and it was the British schools. So I never had to be interpreted in either of those places.
Okay.
And in the Middle East as well.
Oh yes, the Middle East, yeah, definitely. They speak English. So with this book, and when does it come out?
June, a year. Actually, what is today? It'll be out like in a year from now. I think they said June 3rd. So,
boy, it takes a long time.
It certainly does. But I'm still in the middle of writing it. But my first draft's due in the middle of August, and then they do a conceptual review to make sure it makes sense, which is great because you know how it is. You think you have wrote it really well, and then you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. And then I have to fix it, and then they do a copyright, and then they publish it, and then we start the promotion. But I'm doing like I've been putting out bits of it in my blogs, just testing out concepts, and I'll be doing like little videos, and before the book even comes out, we'll be out there, sharing a lot of the content because I just think it's so important.
Yes. And I appreciate you sharing it with us. And I will absolutely put a link to your blog and your bio and ways to contact you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll publish all of those because I think this is also a very important topic, not only for coaches, but also for leaders who value developing others and want to have a view of what that conversation looks like. A lot of pressure for leaders to develop others for a multitude of reasons.
Absolutely.
But I don't see a lot of really good training in how to help leaders have those development conversations.
I know, and it's all based on these, like linear, really problem-solving models. Like even the GROW model is, they go, okay, here's the goal. What do you think about it? What are your options? What's the consequences? So it's still the same old thing. And again, they think that they're supposed to be just asking questions, which is hard to shift into question mode. But it's easy enough. Somebody stops you in a hallway and says, oh, I've got all these, things crashing in on me. And you say, okay, so, you've told me like 4 different problems that have risen at once. As you've been talking about it, which is the most critical one that you need to address right now, and so, you base it on a reflection. It's easy enough to do that, because the person is just giving it to you and you just give it back. You just give it back and see what they think. And so it's like, yeah, I know it's at first it seems hard to not just give people the solution. I always say to my leaders, are you willing to give up being the expert in order to be the coach?
Well, that's it. That's the shift right there.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of leaders that I work with, they're extremely smart. It's the mindset that I'm the leader, I have the answers, so I need to provide the answers. And if I ask questions or do something like that, not only does it feel awkward, but it feels like they're going to think I'm stupid.
I'm going to think I'm stupid, that I don't have it. Well, and it's so fascinating though, because I find that often with newer leaders, it's even worse because it's like, but I must establish my credibility. Which is really fascinating because a lot of times they're young and they have to manage somebody who's older than them. And trusting the person with experience is probably a little better than telling them what to do.
Yes. What's the most important advice that you have for the listener, whether they're, an individual who is looking to coaching or a leader who wants to be a coach?
When I said to you that all over the world, these people are feeling the pinch, and they're exhausted, they're overwhelmed, they're pressured, anxious, and what that does is you can't be present when you're feeling like that. And so I think before you can do any of these things, it's about how can I shift, turn, and be present to this person in the moment. My favorite quote from the discomfort zone is, what they want from you. They want you to be present more than they need you to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't necessarily need you to be the brilliant one. They need you to be there with them in that moment. So they're not alone, and with that, it starts to build their confidence, and to help them think through what it is, they need to solve. Before any other skill, can you breathe away all that other stuff, turn and be present with the person in front of you? And that goes for coaches as well, to be present in a moment and then to stay present, meaning that they have to catch their fears, they have to catch their judgment, and let it go and come back to be present.
That's wonderfully said. I had a fellow who was with Google for a long time, and brilliant guy, smart like most of the other leaders that we work with. And he left Google after 10 years and went, and now he's in Turkey and he's working with the Turkish government. And he said that at Google, no one ever asked him what his purpose was. They were moving so fast. Yeah. And it was one of the reasons why it was easy for him to leave, because they really didn't know him.
Isn't that amazing? I had a top female engineer from Honeywell say the same thing. They don't really see me, when she left. It's like, even if we practice these things that we're taught in leadership class about authenticity, and that we're not really seeing people.
Yeah. What is a habit or mantra that you have to keep you focused on what's important?
Well, that's an interesting question. So what's important? I mean, keeping me focused, is a matter of what is it that, who is it that I want to be today? What is it that I want to achieve? Keeping me focused in the bigger picture comes back to your Google guy, my larger purpose, keeping that in mind of what is it that I'm wanting to help create in the bigger picture. So it's like, I do these things for coaches and leaders, but I know that in the bigger picture, what I'm wanting to do is create better connections, more meaningful connections, where we truly value the human spirit in each other.
Very clear.
Yeah.
Very clear. I love that. You've got a lot of wisdom. You've been in the coaching arena for a long time. You teach coaching to leaders and to coaches and managers. What's one thing that you've learned over the years of coaching that you didn't know before?
I think when you say didn't know, I think it's what we did know and we've forgotten. So it's remembering. The essence of coaching is that we truly are a partner with this amazing human being sitting in front of us, and they are so capable of finding their way with just a little bit of us standing by their side. And we've forgotten that when we get stuck in the processes and the models and the methods that everybody's pumping out there, that, coming back to that honoring and being with. Coaching actually gives people that sense of, you care about me, my purpose, my heart, my soul. And I think it's just remembering that essence that has gotten lost along the way.
Yeah, that's very well said. Thank you. I appreciate that. All that noise and distraction out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And another book.
Yeah, and another book, which I cannot wait until it comes out and to see how it evolves. I know it's a creative process, and what you think you know what it is now, but by the time it's released, it'll be something just really awesome that I know you're going to be very proud of.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can't wait.
Oh, I bet. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? Something that we don't know about you?
Oh my goodness, so much about me. Actually, I just did my second TEDx talk on how to use anger as a force for good.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah. So here I'm talking about, purpose, soul, connection, and yeah, I've had a lot of anger in my life. And things that can come up that I'm still angry about now. But I learned along the way, out of necessity, how to use the energy of anger to create things in my life, and how to shift it for other people.
Mm.
I'm proud of that last talk, and it shows that if I didn't learn how to do that, I'd either be dead or in prison right now. So
All right. No, so you laid the bomb on the last 5 minutes of our call. So I'm going to have to invite you back to find out what that anger was all about.
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed reconnecting with you and hearing about your new book. I learned a lot from it, and I'm sure, our audience will too.
Thank you.
I'm Cinder Niemela, and you've been listening to the Inspired Wisdom Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We hope these conversations illuminate your path to your highest potential. For show notes and links to resources mentioned during today's episode, please go to inspiredwisdom.us. You can also follow Inspired Wisdom on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, design a fulfilling and prosperous life that engages your talents and passions.